The hell is that? Walter's voice cracked through the wind as his shovel struck something solid beneath the half-flooded rose bed. The storm had torn the garden apart, roots exposed like veins, petals drowned in mud, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and lightning. He bent down, breath trembling, brushing away clumps of soaked soil until his fingers met cold metal. It wasn't a rock. It was a bracelet, rusted, bent, engraved with letters eaten by time, but still visible under the trembling beam of his flashlight. MS. His breath caught. His son's initials. 20 years of silence collapsed into that one sound of metal scraping metal, and the memory of that night came back in pieces. The police taped, the empty coffin, the town's pitying eyes, the lies. He dropped the shovel. The rain hit harder, but he didn't move. His old hands, stiff and shaking, clutched the bracelet as if it were still warm. A flash of lightning revealed his reflection in the puddle, aged, gray, and haunted, but in his eyes burned something alive. He whispered, "You never left me, did you, son?" And the words broke the silence he'd carried for 2 decades. He stumbled to his shed, clutching the bracelet like a wound. Inside, the dim bulb flickered, revealing rows of gardening tools lined with perfect care. Trowels, pruners, shears, all shining under oil and discipline. On the wall hung a photograph. His son Michael, 17, grinning in a faded baseball uniform. Walter stared at it until the bulb steadied. They said you tripped, that you fell. His voice was low, trembling between disbelief and rage. But this was buried under your grave. The bracelet's mud-stained curve gleamed faintly as he washed it under the sink, watching brown water spiral down the drain like years wasted in quiet grief. Beneath the grime, a second engraving appeared, tiny, almost hidden. Property of Meadow Ridge Athletics, the town's elite school. His son had never gone there. He closed his fists around it. The bulb above him hummed louder. He knew what it meant, even before his mind allowed it. The boys from Meadow Ridge. The ones who called Michael trailer trash behind the gas station. The ones whose father shook his hand at the funeral with eyes that didn't blink long enough to feel sorry. Walter exhaled, long and deep. The rain outside softened, like a curtain falling after an act. He sat heavily at the workbench, pulling an old notebook closer, the kind gardeners used to track soil pH and bloom cycles. But his pen didn't draw rows or fertilizers this time. It wrote names. Harris, Cole, Jennings, each one inked with trembling patience. Each letter slower than the last, like carving them into the wood of time itself. He looked back at the photo again, his son's smile frozen in summer light. "They buried you here, Michael," he said softly, "and they thought planting flowers would hide it." He looked out through the shed window toward the soaked garden. The roses, battered by the storm, bent low as if listening. "But you've been talking all along." The night deepened. Thunder rolled far off, and the world outside the glass seemed to hold its breath. Walter lit a small lantern, setting the bracelet beside it. He could still smell the faint scent of soil and iron, the perfume of truth rising from rot. He thought of the Memorial Park Committee that came every spring to honor his son's name, the same men who bought his silence with plaques and maintenance jobs. They thought he'd grown too old, too harmless, but time hadn't dulled him. It had sharpened him in secret. He looked down at his hands, callous, scarred, and steady. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "we dig again." At dawn, the park was quiet, washed clean. The town's flags fluttered gently above the memorial stones, and dew glistened across the grass like tiny ghosts of last night's rain. Walter worked as usual, pushing his cart, trimming hedges, greeting joggers who passed with polite smiles. None of them noticed the empty patch of soil near the oldest rose bed, or the dirt under his fingernails darker than usual. When the mayor's assistant stopped to thank him for his decades of care, Walter nodded kindly, like always. But his eyes flicked briefly to the man's wristwatch, engraved, expensive, unmistakably Meadow Ridge Athletics alumni. The same emblem etched on the bracelet. He smiled faintly. "Beautiful watch," he said. The man hesitated, unsure why the old gardener's tone carried something heavier than compliment. "Oh, yes, gift from my father." "Why?" Walter shook his head gently. "Nothing," he said. "Just looks familiar." That night, He placed the bracelet inside an old tin box and buried it again, this time beneath a fresh rose bush, marked with a small wooden tag. On it, he wrote a single word: truth. The next morning, visitors would see a new bloom there, deep crimson, petals heavy with dew, the color of memory refusing to fade. As he covered the roots, he whispered, "Grow strong, my boy. We're not done yet." The last spade of soil fell silent. He stood over it, back straight despite the ache. The world was quiet except for the soft ticking of the pocket watch in his vest, the one his son had given him years ago. He lifted it to his ear. The ticking sounded louder tonight, steadier, like time itself was waking up to what he'd found. He closed his eyes. "Time's listening again," he said. And somewhere deep under the earth, the first rose of vengeance began to bloom. "You remember this, don't you?" Walter's voice trembled as he held the bracelet across the counter, its dull metal gleaming under the cafe's yellow light. Across from him, old Mrs. Keene squinted through her thick glasses, the same woman who once volunteered at Meadow Ridge's athletic club. Her hand hovered near the bracelet, but didn't touch it. That's from the old team." "Where'd you find it?" she asked softly. Walter studied her reaction, the flinch, the nervous swallow. He didn't answer. He just smiled politely, the kind of smile he'd used for 20 years to hide his storms. "In my garden," he said. Her lips parted, a faint gasp escaping. "Your garden?" He nodded. "After the storm." The words landed like stones. For a second, the clinking of dishes and the low chatter of morning regulars faded into static. Mrs. Keene's eyes darted toward the back room, toward the clock above the counter. Walter followed her gaze. Time, it always betrayed the guilty first. "You should keep that quiet," she whispered. "Old things bring old trouble." He leaned closer, his voice calm but sharp. "Some trouble deserves to be dug up." He pocketed the bracelet and stood, nodding a polite farewell before walking out into the cold morning. Outside, the town looked harmless, the kind of place that hid its sins behind well-painted fences and Sunday greetings. He crossed the street toward the library, each step heavy but sure. The smell of rain still lingered, mixed with fresh bread from the bakery. Peaceful, ordinary, almost kind. But Walter knew better now. The earth itself had confessed. The library was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Walter walked past the shelves of forgotten history and stopped at the community archive desk. The young clerk, maybe 22, looked up from her phone. "Can I help you, sir?" He slid a slip of paper across the counter. "Yearbooks," he said. "Meadow Ridge Athletics, class of '03. She nodded, fetched 2 thick binders, and placed them before him. The pages smelled like dust and time. Walter flipped slowly, eyes scanning faces. Smiling boys in uniforms. Medals. Trophy photos. Then he saw it. The same crest engraved on a bracelet, worn proudly on their jackets. In the back row stood 3 names he'd written the night before: Harris, Cole, Jennings. The ones who had teased Michael behind the gas station. The ones who told him he'd never belong. His fingers lingered on Harris's grin. He remembered that face. Older now, dressed in suits, shaking hands at charity events, giving speeches about community pride. He'd seen him last year at the park's dedication ceremony, standing right beside the plaque that bore his son's name. Walter felt the pulse in his wrist ticking faster. He leaned closer, reading the caption below the photo. Champions, Meadow Ridge Athletics, sponsored by Cole Construction, the same company that funded the memorial garden. He sat back, eyes burning. They hadn't just buried Michael. They'd built their empire over him. He closed the book gently, the sound of its spine snapping echoing like a quiet threat. That night, Walter returned home with the yearbook, pages copied and folded neatly in his jacket pocket. The house was still, the ticking of the old wall clock the only sound. He placed the bracelet on the table beside the copies, lighting a single lamp. The light pooled like a confession circle. He took out an old photograph, Michael and him fixing the first rose trellis together, his boy's hands dirty but proud. "You see, son," he whispered, "they built their lives on our graves." His hand clenched until the paper wrinkled. Then he exhaled. Anger wouldn't do it. Not loud, not messy. Patience was his weapon. He reached for the phone book, a relic from another age, and began tracing numbers. Harris Masonry, Cole Construction, Jennings Foundation, all the same network. All the same names on plaques and donation boards across town. He marked each with a small red dot. When he was done, he stared at the page as if studying a battlefield map. The rain outside began again, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the window in rhythm with his thoughts. He stood, putting on his coat. His next stop would be the church. The same church that hosted every memorial and donor appreciation night for Meadow Ridge. The same church where, once a year, the town's finest pretended to pray. Inside the dim hall, Walter found Father Dillon sweeping near the altar. "Evening, Walter." The priest said kindly, "You're out late. Just came to ask something." Walter's voice was steady. "That donation plaque outside, the one for the garden, who approved the names?" The priest hesitated. "The committee? Mostly Mr. Cole, Mr. Harris. They've done a lot for town." "Yes," Walter said softly. "They have." His eyes moved to the cross on the wall. "Tell me, Father, does redemption still count if the sinner never confesses?" The priest frowned, unsure where this was going. "God knows the truth of all hearts." Walter nodded once, politely. "Then I suppose it's time the town knew it too." He turned and walked out before the priest could reply, his footsteps echoing through the hollow aisle. Outside, the storm had eased again, the streetlights glistening off wet pavement. He paused at the memorial gate, reading the names on the polished plaque. In memory of Michael Dean, 1985 to 2003. Donated by Cole Construction. He traced the engraved letters with his thumb, feeling the cold metal against his skin. "You bought your forgiveness cheap," he whispered. "Let's see how much truth costs." Back home, he opened his toolbox and removed a small, dented recorder, the kind reporters used decades ago. He set it beside the bracelet and pressed record. His voice came quiet, deliberate. "Day 1. The names are still alive. The ground remembers. And tomorrow, the digging begins." He clicked it off, slid the recorder into his pocket, and stared out the window. The moon hung low over the garden, silvering the roses. Their petals moved in the night wind like breathing things. Walter's hand rested on the windowsill, fingers trembling with purpose. "Time's listening," he whispered again. Then, faintly, from outside, the crunch of gravel. A car idled down the street, its headlights briefly sweeping across his house before vanishing. Walter didn't move. He only watched the darkness return, his reflection merging with it, eyes steady, waiting. The last sound was the tick of his pocket watch, louder than ever, marking the start of his silent war. "Tell me, Harris," Walter said softly, kneeling by the rose bush, "do you ever think about the dead when you walk past flowers?" The younger man froze. The question came out of nowhere, sharp and clean as a blade. Harris had come to the park early that morning for a photo shoot, press coverage for the new community renewal project. His smile, as always, looked perfectly rehearsed. But now it faltered. "Excuse me," he said, adjusting his tie, glancing around for anyone watching. Walter kept his eyes on the soil. "I said," he repeated, "do you ever think about the dead?" He drove the trowel into the ground. The metal struck something solid. A dull clink. Harris's smirk returned, though his voice wavered. "You've lost your mind, old man. Maybe it's time you retire." Walter dug slower this time, letting the sound echo, deliberate, steady. When the trowel lifted again, a small piece of broken metal appeared. Another bracelet link, smeared with dirt. Harris's expression changed. "That looks like trash," he said, stepping back. "Throw it away." Walter wiped the link on his sleeve, revealing the faint crest of Meadow Ridge Athletics. "Trash," he said quietly. "Yes, that's what they call my boy, too." The silence between them thickened, filled only by the whisper of wind through the roses. Then Harris cleared his throat and muttered something about a meeting before hurrying toward the parking lot. Walter didn't watch him leave. He simply pocketed the link and whispered, "One down." By noon, news spread through town that Councilman Harris had canceled his event after a sudden family emergency. Walter read it on his phone at the diner, stirring his coffee slowly. Across the room, Two women gossiped about how the mayor looked furious, how something had been found near the garden. Walter sipped quietly, the faintest smile in his eyes. The plan was working. Guilt was a seed. Once planted, it grew in silence. The next day, Walter arrived early again, carrying a crate of new rose plants. Each hole he dug wasn't random anymore. Beneath every fresh bloom lay something tied to the past. A photo, a copied page in a yearbook, a rusted emblem. Symbols of truth buried deep, waiting for the roots to find them. He worked methodically, talking softly as he worked, like a father confiding in his son. "You see, Michael," he whispered, "roses need two things to grow, light and truth. We're giving them both." Days passed. The garden flourished unnaturally fast. Flowers that once took months to bloom opened overnight, deep crimson and wild, their scent carrying to the park like a haunting memory. Visitors called it a miracle. The mayor called it good PR. But Walter knew better. These blooms weren't miracles. They were witnesses. Every petal seemed to breathe the name of the guilty. The next visit came from Mr. Cole himself, the construction magnate, the man whose company had built a memorial after Michael's death. He walked with practiced ease, hands clasped behind his back, voice oily with charm. "Walter, my friend," he began, "the town owes you gratitude. These roses, spectacular, a symbol of community, yes?" Walter smiled faintly. "Community," he repeated. "That's one word for it." Cole crouched near a row of bushes, brushing the petals with his thick fingers. "Red like fire," he said, laughing. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Walter tilted his head. Beautiful things often grow from buried pain. The words made Cole pause, but he shrugged it off. "You've got a poet's heart, old man. Keep tending to them, will you? You're good for this town." When Cole left, Walter's gaze followed him until the black SUV disappeared beyond the gate. He turned back to soil, digging deeper this time, his movements slow and steady. From the pocket of his coat, he took a small envelope, an old photograph folded twice. It showed a group of boys at a bonfire, laughing, beer bottles in hand, one car's headlights casting harsh light over their faces. At the edge of the frame lay something else, a pair of sneakers, half visible, a body out of focus. The corner of the photo bore the same crest again, Meadow Ridge Athletics. He placed the picture in the hole and covered it gently. "You can't hide forever," he whispered. That night, thunder rumbled far off again, like the sky remembering what it had done. The next morning, another headline hit the local paper. "Councilman Harris under investigation for fraud allegations." Walter read it in silence, eyes unmoving. He didn't need to know how it happened. The truth had its own way of surfacing when disturbed. He folded the paper neatly and tucked it beside the growing notebook of names and dates. Each line was now marked with progress, one tremor at a time. He wasn't finished. Later that week, a familiar face arrived at the park, Mrs. Keene, the cafe woman. She stood awkwardly near the roses, twisting her hands. "Walter," she said, her voice small, "you've started something, haven't you?" He didn't look up from pruning. "Started?" "No," he said quietly. "Just continuing what they thought they ended." She stepped closer. "They'll come after you." "Maybe," he said, trimming another bloom. "But they'll have to step in the garden first." The way he said it made her shiver. She walked away without another word. The evening light deepened to gold, the roses glowing softly under it. Walter stayed until dusk, hands dirty, heart calm. He felt no fear, only purpose. When he finally locked up the shed, he noticed something glinting under the fence. A small charm, maybe dropped, maybe placed. He picked it up. Another emblem. Meadow Ridge Alumni 2003. He stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "They're watching." Back home, he poured himself tea, the pocket watch ticking on the table beside him. The bracelet lay next to it, the two pieces fitting almost perfectly now that he'd found a new link. He ran a thumb over the metal and exhaled. The roses had begun to speak, but there was still one name left, Cole. He turned the page in his notebook and wrote it again, darker this time, pressing until the pen almost tore through the paper. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of roses all the way through the open window. It mingled with the hum of distant thunder, a promise of rain and reckoning. Walter lifted the watch to his ear. Its ticking sounded stronger than ever, like a countdown nearing zero. "Tomorrow," he whispered, setting it down beside the bracelet. "Tomorrow, we start digging where the real rot lives." The last word hung in a room like the first crack in a tomb about to open. "Why is my name on that article, Walter?" Cole's voice cut through the quiet like a blade scraping metal. He stood at the gate of the Memorial Park, his expensive suit clashing against the mud-soaked earth. Walter didn't look up from the rose bush he was trimming. His shears clicked in slow rhythm, sharp, deliberate. "Because truth has roots," he said softly, "and roots always find daylight." Cole stepped closer, his shoes sinking into the damp ground. "You think digging up old dirt makes you a hero? You're slandering people who built this town." Walter's eyes lifted then, steady and unflinching. "You didn't build this town, Mr. Cole. You paved over it." Cole's nostrils flared. "You're old, bitter, and confused. You should have died with your son instead of dragging everyone else down." The shears froze midair. For a long moment, the only sound was the whisper of wind through the roses. Then Walter stood slowly, his knees creaking, his hand still holding the tool like an extension of his will. "Careful," he said quietly. "That's the kind of sentence a guilty man says before something breaks inside him." Cole looked around the park, empty, quiet, surrounded by trees heavy with dew. His voice lowered. "You've been stirring people up. Harris is panicking. Keene won't open her shop. The papers are full of rumors. What's your endgame, Walter?" Walter took a step forward, his eyes gleaming faintly in the overcast light. "Justice," he said. "Not revenge. Justice has memory. It doesn't fade when the crowd leaves." Cole smirked, though his jaw twitched. "You think anyone believes you? There's no proof, no witnesses. Just an old man with a garden full of flowers and ghosts." Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a small cassette recorder, the same one from nights before. He pressed play. The air filled with a younger voice, Cole's, slurred, laughing, followed by another voice, Harris maybe, shouting through static. "He went under. Don't stop, man, just drive." The laughter turned into silence, then tires skidding, a splash. Cole's face drained of color. Walter stopped the tape. "You left him there," he said softly. "A boy drowning in a ditch while you laughed. The police report said accident. But you and your friends, that tape proves nothing." Cole snapped. "It's old. It's truth," Walter interrupted. "And it's already copied. One to the paper. One to the sheriff. One to the church. I buried them like I buried the roses, deep but not too deep to bloom." Cole's breathing quickened. "You don't understand what this will do. My family. Your family will finally know what kind of man raised them," Walter said. "That's not punishment. That's inheritance." Cole took a step back, his polished shoes sliding in the mud. His anger cracked into fear. "You think people will thank you for this? You'll be alone, Walter. You'll ruin yourself." Walter gave a faint, tired smile. "I've been alone for 20 years. But at least now I'll be honest." Cole's voice rose, desperate. "You want to destroy everything we built over one mistake?" He was drunk. We all were. It wasn't supposed to happen. Walter's hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "And you buried him like a weed, then paid me to grow flowers over his bones. That's what you built, Mr. Cole. A garden of lies." Cole's mouth opened, but no words came. The air felt heavier now, rain threatening again. Walter turned away and began walking toward the plaque by the gate. "This park was meant to be his peace," he said without looking back. "Now it'll be your mirror." Cole's breathing grew ragged. "If you think anyone will believe an old man over me, they already do," Walter said. "You should check the morning news." He gestured toward the bench where the latest newspaper lay, soaked at the edges. The headline, barely readable through the damp ink, bore the words, "New evidence in 2003 Meadow Ridge case. Town leaders implicated." Cole's body went still. His phone buzzed in his pocket, once, twice. He didn't answer. The color drained from his face as realization settled like stone. Walter turned and looked at him one last time. They'll come for you now, he said quietly. Not with handcuffs, maybe, but with silence. The kind you can't outtalk or outspend. Cole's lips parted, a faint sound escaping. Half a curse, half a plea. But Walter was already walking away, toward the rose beds that shimmered under the dim light. He knelt beside the one marked Truth, brushing rain from its petals. You can rest now, son, he whispered. The soil finally remembers your name. Behind him, the faint sound of footsteps faded. Cole's car door slammed, engine roaring to life, then screeching away down the wet road. Walter didn't look up. He just sat there, the rain beginning to fall again, soaking his clothes, mixing with the dirt under his fingernails. The thunder rolled softly over the hills, distant and tired, like the end of a long confession. Hours later, when the police came, they found the park empty, just roses swaying gently under silver light, each bloom marked by small tags. Truth, memory, justice, Michael. On the bench sat Walter's pocket watch, still ticking, still steady, beside a handwritten note. It read simply, he couldn't turn back time, but he made the world remember it owed him. And as the clock's rhythm faded beneath the rain, a single red petal fell from the last rose, landing quietly on the words, sealing his justice in silence. Fire, make sure to like this channel, subscribe, and enjoy the videos.